All right, great. So let's start. Good afternoon. My name is Peter Huang. I'm the managing editor at Gene Culture and Commerce. So thank you so much for joining us today for a special webinar on cultural live streaming. And today we will be looking at the live streaming trend in the cultural sphere and help to unpack some of the key concepts, ideas, examples, and strategies behind this phenomenon. And some of the, and also we'll be hearing directly from experts who are behind some of the most successful live streaming campaigns in the museum and destination world this year. So joining us today, we have Sebastian Badu, who is the managing director of Alibaba in France. So welcome. We also have Natasha Ferry. She is the tours and groups manager at the British Museum. So thanks for joining us. And last but not least, we have Ada Xu. She is the regional director of Europe and Middle East at Fliggy. She is, so Fliggy is the online travel platform owned by the Alibaba Group. And so she will be joining us through a special video presentation. So we really have a pretty exciting lineup, and we'll be hearing from them directly very soon. Just a quick reminder, so we will be answering questions at the end of the webinar. And so I think the chat is open right now. So please feel free to type in your questions as we go along. And when you do, please make sure to write down who the question is for. And we'll try to get to as many of them as possible towards the end. And so before we start, I want to just take a minute and just to address one thing very quickly. So you might have noticed by now that the name of our publication has changed from Gene Travel to Gene Culture and Commerce. And if you have been trying to get onto our website, you are being redirected to a new website. So for those of you who have been with us for a long time, I just want to, you might be wondering, what is happening and if this is an accident, right? And in fact, this is a rebranding and expansion that's in the making for months. And on behalf of our team, I'm very proud to finally introduce you to Gene Culture and Commerce today. So what is Gene Culture and Commerce? In a nutshell, Gene Culture Commerce is in some ways your go-to source for latest strategies, technologies, and solutions in the cultural sphere. So think about whether it's aspects of the museum innovations, anything from digital programming to new revenue generation models, and all the way to new ways to engage with audiences for destination marketing organizations or DMOs. Our goal is really to strive to offer you the latest news and insights on the issues that really matter to you. And in addition to the latest developments in the United States and Europe, we will continue to cover the cultural tech and the travel aspects in Asia, especially in China, right? As many of you know, this is where some of the most innovative models have been created and put into wider use in the past couple months. So all the things that you love about Gene Travel are still here. The latest emerging trends, analysis of destinations, about travel market, consumer behaviors analysis, so on and so forth. So all these things are still here. And in fact, I think it's fair to say by expanding our reach and pursuing this new direction, we are in some ways in a better position to offer more tailored and timely travel content and just overall better experience and better products, such as the live streaming webinar that you're watching right now and the report that's going to come out very soon. And really the goal is to meet your needs in an ever-changing time. So please make sure to check back to our website and write to us and let us know what you think. We'd be happy to hear about your feedback, and I welcome you to join us. And as managing editor, and as we embark on this new journey as Gene Culture and Commerce, I sincerely hope that our publication is now more vital to your institution, your brand, and your agency than ever. So having said that, And just to set the stage for today's conversations, I want to just take the next couple of minutes to share with you some insights and some context about cultural live streaming and offer some observations. So without question, I think live streaming has emerged from the pandemic as the dominant digital practice in China. And so we've seen plenty of travel agencies, brands, hotels, airlines adopting live streaming to promote their brands and to connect to Chinese and global audiences. And if you really think about it, right, live streaming is by itself, it's just such a great way to deliver content through creating this unique, personalized experience. It also provides new opportunities for brands, institutions to increase their visibility and push their products and culture products in the case of museums directly to consumers, often through a seamless connection to e-commerce platforms and also with mobile payment system, and so on and so forth. So as a publication that sort of sits on this intersection of arts, culture, technology, and travel, naturally we picked up on this growing popularity of live streaming amongst cultural institutions, first in China and then later on with Western museums. So working closely with Fleety, we then set to produce this webinar and then also a white paper that we believe would provide the context, the insights, and even some hands-on practical tips for museums, cultural institutions, agencies, and cultural professionals to learn about live streaming in a cultural and global context. And hopefully, we'll be able to provide useful information, and in some ways serves as inspiration for you to, as you think about your audience, your revenue strategies and other digital strategies and partnerships and more. We understand that this also is a timely project. So I think there is no doubt that this has been a very difficult year for cultural institutions and arts organizations, not just in China, but from all around the world, right? So cultural institutions are facing a wide range of challenges, from losing foot traffic to budget cuts to layoffs, just to name a few. And I think with international travels comes to a near full stop, particularly for Western museums and destinations who used to rely on outbound tourism, are also losing that market, and many of whom are coming from China. But I also want to say, disregard of all these, it's also a year of many new innovations that we've seen coming out of the museums and cultural institutions. So we covered, from the Palace Museum to UCCA in Beijing, to the British Museum, the Louvre, the Versailles, and DMOs such as, Tourism New Zealand. We've seen many exciting and ambitious live streaming campaigns and initiatives sort of taking place one after another. And through these examples, we learn that while the physical travels have stopped, the needs for arts and culture from audiences from around the world have actually not decreased, right? But in many ways, they're on the rise even. So I was thinking about even, during the height of the pandemic in China, we have seen audience participating in cultural events virtually with a high level of enthusiasm that we have not seen in a while. To better illustrate, to better understand this, we spoke to Ada Shi. As I mentioned, she is the Regional Director of Europe and Middle East at Fleety. And I think she explains really well about how Fleety is meeting these needs, and particularly, coming from Chinese audience perspective and thinking about that needs for unique cultural experiences, and be able to connect that to live streaming collaborations with museums and destinations in Europe. And so today she has a video presentation for us, and here is what she has to say. So I think her voice is not coming up.
The Fliggy virtual tourism campaign was created while the pandemic to help Chinese travelers and international destinations to stay connected while the lockdown. I was speaking to a colleague based in Wuhan in February at the height of the lockdown in China. And she told me that she was dealing with a customer who had to cancel her honeymoon trip in Europe. And we can understand that this lady was very upset, sad, and frustrated. And she was crying on phone. When the lockdown restrictions came into effect, it was woe for everyone, for businesses and customers alike. But the history of this lady was very touching. And that's how the idea came up. We wanted to do something for these Chinese travelers who had to cancel their plans, especially for the ones who has planned their lifetime trip. We had seen great success of live streaming on the other platforms of Alibaba Group to showcase brands and products. So it feels natural that we try to connect potential Chinese travelers with international destinations from the comfort of their homes. Through Fliggy Virtual Tourism Series, we are able to give to Chinese consumers exclusive behind-the-scene access from famous hotspots, which would be otherwise closed to the world. We have partnered with Château de Versailles, with British Museum in London, with Museo Nacional del Prado in Spain, with Louvre Abu Dhabi and Louvre Paris. The majority of them have never taken part in a live stream before. And at first it was pretty doubting idea, but at the end, they're all very surprised and happy with a high level of interaction and engagement. From our customer side, we had amazing feedback. One customer said it's a once lifetime experience and he felt so lucky to take part in. The popularity from Fliggy virtual tourism series is driven by several reasons. The most important one is the passion and the expertise of the staff of the museum leading the tours. The second one, the desire of the Chinese consumers who want to engage and to know more about the brands and the products that they are buying. And finally, I think the immersive and the interactive aspect of live stream is a very important point, because live streaming is a unique tool. It's immersive and can create feeling of authenticity that you can't find in other marketing tools. Live streaming is on a remarkable trajectory and became very quickly one of the most important marketing tools a brand needs to use to engage with his Chinese audience. For sure, the pandemic has transformed the travel industry, but it also gives an opportunity to tourist destination. For example, on Fliggy, they can engage directly with a very captive audience.
Oh, great. I wish I could say thank you, Ada. I mean, it's a video presentation, but I think she says it really well. And in her video, she touches on several key points that we have seen over and over again in some ways in successful live streaming campaigns that we covered. For instance, in one way or another, it always starts with the passion of the institution, that urge to wanting to share their stories and creating that unique cultural experience for their audiences. And also part of that really is to understand and be able to relate to, right, the desire and needs of the audiences as well. And we also find that having an authentic voice that is true to your identity, whether you're a brand agency or museum, is so important for any type of content on this platform, because you really have this one-on-one opportunity to talk to an audience from thousands of miles away. And so, of course, and this is the other point that it's probably very obvious, but collaborating with the right partner to execute and deliver is also really crucial. You have to be able to find the right partner and then be able to do that. So next, we'll be looking at some of the more specific examples and strategies and hear directly from the experts behind them. So I want to first welcome Sebastian. And first of all, I want to say congratulations on all these successful campaigns and initiatives that you've been doing. We will be talking about some more specific strategies later. But to start, could you maybe help to paint a picture of what are some of the unique challenges for French cultural institutions during this pandemic?
Which today is continuing some more, because as you may have heard, we're now going back into lockdown at midnight tonight and closing down all the museums that have been open for a little while. So it's a challenging day to be talking about it, but actually also a good day to be talking about it, because I think what we've seen and what I'm very proud of, the success really belongs to the museums, doesn't really belong to us. Which is all we did is create kind of like Alibaba always does. We're a marketplace. We basically put platform, or we put content, or we put users, or we put products in front of potential consumers, and this was the way here. The idea was the content was what was in the museums. The beauty of it, as you said, it was these incredible experts taking you on an amazing tour, kind of like a private tour. That's what it felt like. And then on the other hand, like the users really uptaking and being so passionate about having that experience. So the success is really on these two ends. We're just a platform. What I really enjoyed, what I thought was really amazing is on our end, to take a little bit of the credit, is how agile and reactive the team was. So I talked about this a little bit, and where it came from a customer being so sad about not celebrating her honeymoon in Europe, but this can-do attitude and this capacity to say, well, okay, we're obviously incredibly challenged by the situation, because there's 2.3 million Chinese tourists that come every year to France, and right now, and it's been now 8 months, there's almost none. Actually, there's none. So what do? How do you pivot? And I think the speed at which we were able to pivot and come up with new ideas, and I think it's only the beginning. I think we're going to come up with other new ideas, has been really amazing. So that to me is the first lesson, is the agility, and I think that's something that's very in the DNA of Alibaba, very in the DNA of the Chinese people as a whole. And we all heard about the hospital being built in 10 days during the crisis there. I mean, only in China, right? But the other thing, and while you were talking, and I saw this morning after reading the news, this idea of because you said that maybe also in these times we need even more art. And I remember seeing this morning something that said Earth without art is just and that is so true, right? Like if you take art out of Earth, it's just so we all need art one way or another. And I think that especially in these times, and I think China is obviously not being confined, but I think that or quarantined, but I think that giving access to as much art as possible is something that no matter what the situation is something that's going to create value in people's lives, and is going to create happiness. It's going to open up their minds, open up curiosity, and I think that we all have a very, very important role to play there. So now, as far as the institutions in France, I think the and this is an important point. We did it with Versailles first. We did it with Louvre after, and obviously those are two very large, probably the two biggest museums, or the most well-known museums in France. The idea is that how do we, and the success and the engagement level was just incredible. I think we touched people clearly that were planning on coming to Paris, but we also touch people that may never come to Paris
Yeah.
and never actually see these works of art, or maybe we created the envy for these people to go. And I think that is really, and we'll be able to like see down the line the impact of what that had. And are we going to see, once travel opens back up,
Yeah.
higher conversion rate for the people that actually watch these live streams, and the numbers were very encouraging. There's over 500,000 people during the Louvre live stream. I think now the question is, and going back also to your point on live streaming, which I think was key, the fact that it's become, and I saw the numbers, I don't know if you saw them this morning, but we were starting to see the numbers from 11/11, which has nothing to do with culture, all to do with e-commerce and shopping. But the live stream numbers in terms of revenue are just mind-boggling. I mean, it's a tsunami in terms of like how incredible it is and how big of a success it is.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a shift, and it's a hard shift, and it's something that is going to stay. And our point of view is to say it is what it is in China. And culturally, it's probably there in a certain way. It will be different here, but the idea is that we are trying to touch the Chinese consumer, but we should do it with a European flair. And I think that what we should try to work on, and maybe that's the challenge, and what we're going to be seeing in the next few months, is creativity, new ways. Right now, so far, it was the way that it was, and I think already it was great. I think we can take it a step further and include creativity. And when you think about France, France is the land of fashion, it's the land of food, it's the land of art, and in a lot of ways of music, of theater, etc. There's a lot of creativity in the country, and I'm expecting to see new ways to do live stream coming from creative French minds to touch the Chinese market. That's the challenge. But I really feel that it's something that France is really able to do, and small institutions are able to do.
I agree with you. I think you touched on so many really interesting points. You talked about, I want to just focus a little bit on, at the beginning, you talked about, Fleagy is only sort of half of this equation, right? In terms of being able to present this to the audiences from around the world, particularly the Chinese audience. And so I'm just wondering, how do you go about and create these kind of partnerships to build this relationship that has trust and then be able to operate? Because I know, museums might be also having their concerns, their challenges as well. So how do you go about and create these long-lasting relationships?
I mean, I think it's really Ada is the one who's doing most of that, and I think it's the thing that Fleagy was doing ahead of the pandemic. Because it is a travel platform, but the idea goes beyond travel. The idea was to say, how can we give a Chinese tourist who, unlike a Western tourist, when we travel in South America or in Southeast Asia or in Europe, we speak English, and most people can understand a few words, and then you can really like go. All of us can go pretty much anywhere in the world and be understood. When a Chinese tourist comes over to Europe, if he or she only speaks Chinese, it's a very complicated situation. And I think that like what we've been trying to do is, because they don't want anymore what they used to have, which is I hop on a bus, I get off, I take 2 pictures of the Louvre, I get back on the bus. They want to create their own experience. And so what we had already been doing was to partner up with museums, but not only, and to create their own experiences. So we already had the relationships. We had already been talking to museums to think about what we could offer specific to Chinese tourists, something really like that really made them feel like it was different. It was something that nobody else had access to necessarily. So we had been talking with them, we had the relationships, and when the pandemic hit, and when we were thinking about doing something different, we went back to these people. And what we loved, and I think you mentioned that, and what has been really amazing, or Ada did in the video, is how open our partners were in doing something different, and in finding new ways to engage with the consumer. And when I was talking about creativity before, they brought forth the best experts who were thinking, okay, well, we're going to show this piece of art or that piece of art because this is what's going to resonate with the Chinese tourists or the potential Chinese tourists. And so really it was also on their end as well. So I think we had the relationships, we just and the idea is to see how we're going to be able to extend that to new relationships that we may not have today,
right?
Or to go deeper with existing relationships such as Louvre British Museum and Prado and etc.
Yeah, and I think probably part of extending that relationship is what we would say a conversion, right? Like being able to convert the audiences who are watching the live streaming, and for each one of them, I understand that they probably are they need different things, but there is a conversion path from the institution's perspective. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I think there's 3 levels of conversion, right? Like the first one is, what we're and it's hard to say right now, but we'll be able to tell in maybe 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
But out of the people that watch these live streams, how many were planning on coming to Europe, and then how many will actually end up going to Europe. So we'll be able to see in terms of once travel opens back up again, we're expecting no matter what to have a high demand like we've seen in e-commerce, or sorry, like in regular commerce when shops reopen. For example, in China, when the Hermes flagship store reopened in Shanghai, they did the biggest sales day ever because people had been really wanting to go. I think we'll see something similar in travel, but that will be one thing we'll be able to see out of the people that watch how many converted. The other thing which I find is interesting is, as you know, we started doing e-commerce, and it's still a really big part of what we do, is the tie-in to potential commercial opportunities. And the Louvre, on top of doing a live stream, also did what we call a super brand day, which is selling products that had, it could be like a mug with a piece of art, or it could be actually, we had a partnership with L'Oreal who came up with a type of product that also had some branding from some IP that belongs to the Louvre, and that super brand day was an incredible success, and clearly there's a link between. I mean, I think it would have been successful no matter what, because there is an interest in these types of product, and they're iconic and they represent France, and we know that the Chinese people are really touched by that art and the fact that it's the history behind it, etc. Because I think that's something that we have in common, China and Europe, like the fact that we're very old civilizations, and I think that's something that we share. But on top of that, I think that having the live stream ahead of time prime the interest of the consumer. So I think the tie-in between what you can do from a virtual visit to potential conversion in e-commerce is something also that can be very, very interesting. So those are the two things. So the conversion to travel, but potentially the conversion to e-commerce down the line as well.
I think these are in some ways really valuable lessons or takeaways for a lot of cultural institutions as they're looking into the strategy. But one question that we get quite often is to say, a lot of times the museums or cultural institutions writing to us, probably they're not the top tier, the most well-known museums. They probably are, the mid to second tier or third tiers. And so to those museums and cultural institutions with quite limited resources, what do you say to them? How could they also in some ways be able to be part of this and then be able to join some of these initiatives?
So I mean, I don't want to make empty promises and etc. But what I can tell you because again, the idea is that we've just started this, right? So it's not like I have 3 years of experience and I can tell you, oh yeah, we've been doing this and we know this works and this doesn't work, right? So we're kind of learning as we go, and we're learning, and this is really in the DNA of Alibaba. We also learn with our partners hand in hand, and that makes our bond stronger. But what I do know is that when I look at the brand aspect, when I look at more the e-commerce aspect, which for which we have more experience because that we've been doing for more than 5 years, we see that yes, the very large brands, so the equivalent of the Louvre Versailles, which would be like a L'Oreal or a Lancôme, do very well in China, yes. Okay. But we've also been able to bring in much smaller brands, and they've been able to be super successful as well, right? Like last week, we launched Inès de la Fressange, we launched Ami, which are small fashion brands. So they're your equivalent of like smaller museums. So the reason why I'm making this analogy is because it shows that it's not only the big institutions that can benefit from this platform. Now, what we need to do is find a way, because we also have limited resources, because it actually takes us a lot of time, and we need to be there, we need to include the technology, etc. But clearly we need to find a way, because it is in our interest and to broaden as much as possible the scope of type of art or type of experiences that we can give. So I think we're very open to having the discussions with as many museums as possible. I think like the investments are very doable. I don't think they're very high. I think what they need to have is they need to have content that will be of interest to the Chinese consumer, that will be able to package in the right way, and then down the line they can see what they can do with the e-commerce piece as well. But I think it could work for any size museum, and I'm hoping that in the DNA of Alibaba, we say one of our key messages is, and this was from Jack Ma. Jack loved to say that, was small is beautiful. He was always saying that he felt that the big brands don't really need us, right? They'll do great business no matter what. And from the beginning, he wanted to make sure that we would help the smaller guy. And so in this idea, helping smaller museums, I think would be fantastic. So we need to figure out how and potentially develop the platform on how to do it. But I think clearly that there's a potential for it. I'll give you one more analogy in another space, but would just open in August. We launched a platform called AliExpress Connect, which basically puts influencers on the one hand who want to do live streaming, and brands on the other who want their products promoted. And the idea is to recruit 100,000 live streamers within a year.
Wow.
And down the line, potentially 1 million. So the idea is to really make it as inclusive as possible. It's not about, I just want like the really, really big influencer and the Kim Kardashians and Chiara Ferragni, with whom we actually did sign. But we also want we want anybody to be able to have that influence. I think that we may not be able to do every single museum, but to be as inclusive as possible, I think is really in the DNA of Alibaba, and definitely something that we'll be looking on doing going forward.
Yeah, I really like your last point. I think this is such an important point that I feel like we've not, even just in this field, that we're not really talked about this enough, is not just not just the top museums, but as you mentioned, and just think about how do we in some ways almost create an alliance, and then be able to share the creativity, the innovations, and then to, particularly in this time of this is a very trying times, and in fact, I think for a lot of cultural institutions that are struggling are the smaller and mid-tiers. And so I think this is a really important way for them to, to think about this, and then hopefully to continue to innovate and be creative and find a way to survive and thrive.
And maybe, and to your point, maybe they'll be able to partner together. You could have 3 or 4 museums that have something that's similar, like something in common, and then you could imagine a live stream where you would have the first 10 minutes in one museum, the next 10 in another, and so forth and so on, and that would actually be very, very cool.
Exactly. And we've seen that in many Chinese examples where Chinese museums during the pandemic, or 9 museums or 8 museums, they team up with one live streaming session. So hopefully we'll come back to you more. So I already have a couple questions for you from the audience. So we'll come back to that towards the end. So I do want to bring in Natasha Fury at this point. So we talked about a lot of these strategies, and so for British Museum, I think they've done some excellent job work in terms of their digital strategies and live streaming, whatnot. And we've been sort of reporting on the British Museum for a long time, even when we were Jing Travel. And from talking about their Egyptian pop-up in Shanghai, that was in July, and then to their live streaming with Fleety this summer. And so I have to say, our readers are also just really impressed by the wide variety of collaborations and innovations that the British Museum has put up. So Natasha, thanks again for joining us. And so to start with, for our readers who don't know too much about these, the details of these initiatives, could you just briefly speak about your institution's China strategy and then some of the notable initiatives just to set the stage?
Of course, yes. So what we really want to do is let the Chinese consumers know more about the museum itself and our world-renowned collection of objects and art. As we were founded very early on, some late 1700s, we were one of the first public museums in the world. And from the outset, we were a museum of the world, for the world, and that has really remained core in our mission to this very day. So we started out really with a partnership with Affiliate Brands, who are our exclusive master licensee for the British Museum in China. So they've introduced over 1,000 licensed products for us, and we've completed various licensing programs of top consumer brands, from homewares, accessories, and gifts, etc. We've also had our first online flagship store was launched on Tmall in July 2018, I believe, which included fashion accessories, stationeries, and home goods. And the results have been really encouraging from that. And as you said, we also had the live stream earlier this year and also the pop-up as well. And that has also had some really great feedback. By doing all these sort of things, it enables more than 600 million active consumers to experience our iconic collections through products that have been inspired by our collection, but also the experiences like the live stream. So by these partnerships, we are able to bring the wonders of the museum to people across China through product ranges and retail experiences, which through the pandemic, we weren't able to do, especially.
Yeah.
And we also have amazing exhibitions. Over the past 10 years, we've had over 5 million visitors who've seen our touring exhibition throughout China. These have covered a range of topics like history of the world in 100 objects, the wonders of Mesopotamia, Egyptian mummies, Italian Renaissance drawings. And conversation for future shows are ongoing as well, so there'll be much more in the future. So an essential part of our mission and strategy is developing new ways to share the British Museum with the world. And these initiatives that we're doing already are really assisting with our exposure throughout China.
So you mentioned about the vast collection in this really wonderful collection that British Museum has. So when it comes to live streaming, could you just talk a little bit more about how did you actually decide on which content that you wanted to put up? And did Flippy, in some ways be able to provide some kind of insights on what viewers might want to see?
Yes, so we worked very closely with Ada from the beginning about what we wanted to include and not. So they sort of directed us to maybe not include our objects from our Chinese galleries and just sort of focus more on some things that the audience may not be as familiar with. So when I was creating sort of the journey and content, I decided to theme the tour around Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East with a few significant items outside of those areas. And we use data from a number of areas as well that we've had previously. So from our audio guides, previous tours that we've run, and we were able to sort of discover what was the most popular for the Chinese audiences and thus created a journey. So every object has such a remarkable story. So it was quite difficult to sort of narrow it down because we have over 8 million objects. So you can't cover all of those in 2 hours.
Yeah.
That was quite difficult, but it did help with sort of realizing what was most popular for the Chinese visitor, which was Egypt, the Parthenon, mummies, amongst others, were the most popular. And then when sort of preparing for the live stream, it was just sort of like creating a normal tour, but just taking into consideration the digital experience, but also planning the route and content for the audience.
And how did you decide who to speak? Because I assume there are quite a few experts. even just in one department who are capable of leading this kind of this type of live streaming tours. And so how did you actually go about and prepare this and thinking about who's leading the tour? And maybe if you could share with us a little bit about, maybe some of the obstacles that you have to overcome along the way.
Yes. So one of the obstacles was really deciding who could do the live stream, because we were in lockdown and the museum was closed. And I don't know if I don't know about what other countries were doing, but we had a furlough scheme. So most of my colleagues were furloughed, so they weren't allowed to do any work according to the government rules. So one of the main obstacles was sort of figuring out who could help us. So it was really mainly Yiman Lin, who works in our digital division. As a native Chinese speaker, she was able to translate, so she was perfect and very handy. Roger Buchanan, as our commercial director, was also sort of introduced the live stream, and then also myself. I did a majority of the live stream as well. But yeah, the main obstacle was really, finding people who could, help at that time, because it was sort of in the middle of London being completely locked down and museum being closed.
And was it done in-house? Was it, because I understand often these type of initiatives would involve multiple different departments inside a museum, at least here in the United States. Was it also a group, sort of a team effort to pull this off?
Yes, it was a team effort. So Roger Buchanan he's commercial director, so he oversees a number of departments in the museum, one of which I'm in as well as Yiman Lin, and another of people as well that Ada normally talks to previously to the live stream. So it was mainly just our commercial department, but also our marketing team as well. They were involved. But because of the furlough scheme, quite a lot of other departments, so a lot of our curatorial departments had been furloughed as well. So our commercial team and marketing team were one of the few that still had majority of people left.
Yeah. And so we spoke, Sebastian mentioned quite a bit about Chinese consumers and Chinese audiences. And then in Ada's video presentation, she also mentions, there's this desire and needs of Chinese audiences wanting, this cultural experience. So how did you sort of take into consideration of these while looking at the vast collection that you have? Did you take into consideration of Chinese audience needs, tastes when creating the live streaming content? And if you could share a little bit more, what has proven to be sort of the most popular content and approach in this?
Yes, of course. So as I sort of mentioned earlier, we took data and statistics from our audio guides, previous tours and visitor data. And we also used statistics that had been gathered from recommended routes on Chinese social media of our museum, travel websites and apps, browsing interests, and behavior patterns of the sort of average Chinese visitor. And we identified pretty early on, a key core of most popular areas in the museum for Chinese visitors to visit, which was Egypt, our sculpture gallery. Our mummies proved to be very, very popular, especially in the live stream. We discovered even when we were doing the live stream that they wanted more mummies and more of the afterlife. That was very, very interesting to the Chinese audience. And we designed the tour to make sure their needs and tastes were addressed. I think it's really vital to by maintaining engagement, to consider your audience, especially if we're creating something for them and not ourselves. Their preferences and interests were our first concern when designing and planning the journey they would experience.
Yeah. And so if you could talk a little bit about, I think a lot of people are wondering, this is all really great, the team efforts and being able to put up this wonderful, live streaming for a lot of audiences. And just now we spoke a little bit about, the conversion of people who are watching live streaming into potentially, buying your products or whatnot, in some other ways. So could you say a little bit more about, how do you measure the success of the live streaming? Whether that's number of people attended, or was it any other kinds of conversion or boost of traffic to your site? How do you measure that?
So measuring success was trickier than it probably would have been at a different time. With the pandemic, we couldn't sort of measure, increased visits to live visits to the museum as we were closed. But as soon as the pandemic happened, our website traffic incredibly increased. So we've been sort of watching that as well. And we have noticed that it has doubled quite significantly. So we've been watching that after we did the live stream, but we also were measuring it by the number of viewers. And we had around 370,000 people in the first minute, which we're really, really happy with. So that we also measured success that way. And exposure over several social sites is also really fantastic.
Yeah.
That's how we were measuring success. I reckon over the next, as Sebastian said, over the next 6 months to 12 months, we're able to measure it much better as things develop. And also we can look at how our products are doing in Tmall and other places in China that we have.
Yeah, because you're actually one of the first museums to establish Tmall, to establish a shop on Tmall, and that was several years ago. And so it's really nice to see how, from our perspective, I think one of the very important things that we come up with, looking at all these examples, is to see how live streaming is able to fit into a broader sort of digital strategy that your museum or institution has. We at some point we sort of stopped treating it as a singular event, but really looking at more broadly. And speaking of broadly in this connection, what are some of the specific advantages of partnering with a partner like Fleety to conduct a live streaming session?
Well, one of the first things that when we first were approached by Ada was that they'd already done the Palace of Versailles, and that had been really successful. So being able to see that they had already done a really successful cultural live stream, and especially because the Palace of Versailles, while it's very different from the British Museum, it also is sort of the same sort of standard as us. We're one of the highest visited institutions in the UK, and the Palace of Versailles is very similar in France. So while we are very different, we are also rather similar. So it was great to see that they had such great exposure and viewership through Fliggy. So partnering with Fliggy wasn't just the right move decision. And they also offered the opportunity to further our presence in China in regards to travel, which is really important, as a lot of our visitors, 80% or so, are actually international visitors.
Yeah. And I think, so one last question for you, and before we go into the Q&A session, because we do have quite a lot of questions we want to go through. So just very briefly, what lessons will you take from this experience working on a live streaming session? What kind of lessons were you able to, that you wanted to share with others?
So a lot of cultural institutions are older buildings. So our building was definitely not built for broadcast or live streaming. So we had to take that in consideration.
Yeah.
So going forward, you really have to think about Wi-Fi connections. That's really, really key.
Yeah.
We also had a couple of issues with our mic picking up the sound of our footsteps a lot, and sometimes our voices faded out. So it was really making sure that we had the right technology, and that there wasn't too much interruption that draws the viewers away from what they're actually experiencing.
Yeah.
So those are really important. And also in the future, because as I was doing the live stream, I realized wearing high heels, not the best idea. Wearing shoes with soft soles is definitely something that's needed next time.
And also just on that note, and please do let us know and we'll share with everyone when you do have the next live streaming or campaigns that's coming up. And I'm sure a lot more people would want to tune in and then actually be able to experience that. So with that, bringing back Sebastian, and then we have some questions. We have 10 minutes, about 10 minutes left. So we'll try to go through them. All right, so first question and this is for Sebastian, and I actually wanted to ask you this just now so the question is from Lizzie, and she says, what ideas do you have when you talk about how to make French creativity communicate with the Chinese audience?
So I mean, I'm not a creative, so I don't necessarily have the ideas. I think but what I do know is that there's an amazing creative community in France, and what I'm expecting is, and everywhere in Europe, and I'm expecting them partner with us and come up with these ideas. But moreover, I think like the idea, and it was really interesting listening to Natasha talk about the way that they're measuring, and we're also doing some of our measuring as well, so we can measure, you know, how long people. I saw there was another question also on screen fatigue, like the time that the live stream run, etc. But I think that all of these things, all of these data points are going to be, you know, little areas of improvement, seeing, you know, how long we should stay, for example, on one piece versus another. Because as you said, Natasha, like, you know, there's 8 million pieces potentially. So like the potential is so broad, but then like each one has an incredible story behind it. So then the question becomes like, how do people, what is the best way to present these amazing works of art? Is it, you know, could we integrate like augmented reality in there? Could we integrate some kind of gaming function in there as well? We've seen all of these being incredibly successful as well on the commerce part. And then that's where the creativity is going to come in. I think there's so much to explore. You know, you could imagine, so see, I'm becoming creative as you're asking me the question. Like you can imagine some kind of like, you know, maze game where you're like, you know, inside like the museum, and then like, you know, when you get there, then you have a curator can like tell you the things. There's a lot of things that we can do. We could couple it also with commerce and potentially like prizes for people that win, etc. I mean, I think there's a slew, and this is and super exciting, because I think that it's really like a new model and a new business that can be driven and created. So I think a lot will come down the pipe in the coming years, in coming months. I'm talking years. This is China. Months, not years.
So I think, you know, in my understanding, part of this creativity also comes into thinking about new revenue models and new ways that museums will be able to sustain themselves during the pandemic and beyond. And so we do get quite a few questions on asking about the potential revenue path for live streaming. We don't need to go into the details of this, but maybe for both of you, speaking from your experience, just very briefly, what are some of the revenue paths for live streaming going forward?
For us, it's really the products that we have at the moment, because a lot of people can't visit the UK. It is really what we can sell to them online via, you know, our own websites and also our platforms in China. That's our, you know, a more immediate financial things. But it's also, you know, the long term, the exposure of the British Museum to so many people who, as Sebastian was saying earlier, you know, might never go to these places, but never realized it, and now really want to visit or do something more, spend some money on something that they saw when they were doing the live streams. That's our immediate sort of idea with financials.
So my view is more like on the cost side. I saw there were a lot of questions on cost, and I think that I want to make sure that people understand that the cost levels are very, very low, because I mean, all you really need is, you know, if you have access to a camera, if you have access to a live stream. I mean, there is a need to have, you know, and there was another question. I read all the questions. I'm trying to answer some. Time is counted. But there was another question on, you know, who had chosen the translators during the Versailles stream. So that was paid for by the museum. So that does have a cost. And Versailles had picked someone who had been doing this for 20 years, really understood the art world. I don't think you can just take any Chinese translator, it will work. You really need somebody who will understand, you know, what's behind it. So, but beyond that, I think that it is very affordable and very doable for anybody. And then as far as the revenue streams are concerned, I think it's something also that we're going to have to build over time. But we're thinking that obviously, like any tie-ins to products can be very, very, very good. Or down the line, being able to sell potentially like very curated experiences. We know that the Louvre does it sometimes with like, you know, you can privatize a part of the Louvre and everything. So for wealthy travelers, that's something that can be really big as well. So we'll see. But again, this is something that needs to be, you know, invented in some way and created down the line. But in terms of creating at the beginning, that's very open to everybody.
Yes, and also because we were all using mobile phones for the live streaming, so it wasn't
Exactly.
like rent or purchase any major camera equipment. All you need is a good phone, recent one, and the camera quality is amazing.
They're getting better and better.
Yeah.
They are. And so this sort of ties into this question: what is, just very roughly, what is the minimum investment needed to be able to make a museum live streaming of this kind, I guess?
I don't think we even spent anything that I can think of. I think we've maybe bought like one of those stabilizers for iPhones. I think that was really it. We because we used everyone in-house, that was really it. I think only thing in the future that we'll probably be thinking about is making sure that Wi-Fi is really, really good and stable. So making sure that we have extra boxes of routers throughout the space, because a lot of institutions, they're so ginormous.
Yeah.
A lot of the internet is sort of based in the office areas, and distance isn't so good. So I think probably for future investment would be for great internet connection.
That's a great point, Natasha. I think we had the same issues with the Louvre. We had like a lag time because obviously a palace, like the walls are so thick, like even if you have routers everywhere, there's like areas where the Wi-Fi just doesn't go through. And we'll learn from that. I think for smaller museums, there'll be less of a problem because obviously there'll be a smaller space and probably maybe not old like palace, even though some of them will be as well. But that's a good point, the technology piece. But those are not huge investments either.
And so for the last couple of minutes, I wanted to let's spend on the last couple of minutes in talking about what is the future of live streaming in the museum spheres. Because I see a couple of questions. They're asking, is there a chance to potentially feature VR and AR experience, or talking about eventually when visitors are coming back one day, physically coming back to the museums, and where do things like live streaming live? And so if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
So, I mean, on the 2 points really quickly, and I think it's interesting because I think we're talking about tendencies. What we saw, if you look at live streaming, clearly it was existing pre-COVID. It boomed during COVID in China. Now we're totally out of COVID in China. We're not in Europe, obviously, but we are totally out of COVID in China, and it's still there. And it's even like stronger than it was before. So as far as I'm concerned, yes, the live stream makes sense today, but it will also make sense tomorrow, one way or another, to keep the appetite going and keep creating content and keep like creating new streams of revenue for the museum. So I think to me, it's just a new opportunity that we may have never seen before, and COVID helped us figure out that it was there. And then on the augmented reality piece, I think it's kind of similar. It's something that has been going for a while. I think the technology now is more and more powerful. I don't think there's one subway station in Shanghai that doesn't have now some kind of thing like, you look like you're walking through like a waterfall as you're putting your like ticket in. And the idea of like re-enchanting these spaces. I mean, I think a museum is already an enchanted space, right? When I go to a museum, I feel like I'm in an enchanted space, but making it even cooler one way or another, or as people go in or as they go into like a corner or whatever, I think makes a lot of sense as well. And again, this is something that the technology will allow us to do, and I'm really looking forward to some of these things. I think it's already happening. Also, another piece is QR codes, right? Like people didn't use QR codes in Europe so much before. But now with the pandemic, there isn't a restaurant that you go to where you have to scan the menu. So I think in terms of like usage, I think it's also changed a lot. So seeing how that's going to be integrated into the museum's experience is going to be very interesting.
I agree. And also just accessibility. People who may never have thought to visit a museum, whether they live down the road from it or they live halfway across the world, if they have an opportunity to watch something on their phone from their sofa, and they become really interested in it, then they have an opportunity then to visit in the future. Or even if they can't visit, they can discover and learn more and more about it. I think that's what's really important, especially for the British Museum and many other museums and galleries, is just making sure that we can show as many people as possible the amazing history, objects, art that we all have, and make it accessible for everyone as much as possible. And I think it's really interesting to go down the whole VR route as well. I went on a couple of tours of some amazing places in Italy where they were sort of, you could reconstruct what the place would look like 2,000 years ago.
I've seen those. It's amazing.
yeah, it's just incredible. And it's just opening up so many more possibilities for the future and right now.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, on this note, it seems like in the future there's going to be this coexistence of live streaming and the physical initiatives and campaigns. And I think each has its advantage. And then going forward, I think it's up to the museum really to leverage that and then use them really well to reach and grow their audiences. And unfortunately, on this note, we're running out of time. So I want to thank you, Sebastian, Natasha, for joining us today, and then also for Ada and the team at Alibaba and Fleety and the British Museum. So we do have some questions that we've not been able to get to, but please feel free to email me, and we'll try to answer them as best as we could. And then also, lastly, special thanks to our team at Gene Culture and Commerce, which the team spent quite a lot of time working on this project. And I'm really happy that we'll be able to, and it's our pleasure to host both of you today. And so we will continue to produce webinars, white papers, and special reports. And so stay tuned for more. And also make sure to check out our website and sign up for a newsletter for the latest updates. We will be releasing our cultural live streaming white paper with Fleety very soon, in which we'll feature British Museum as one of our primary case studies, and also a more thorough interview with Ada. So do make sure that you come back and check on that. With that, thank you again, and thanks everyone for attending, and have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. All right.